Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another episode of the Uncut Podcast. We have another very big topic to discuss today, and it's a topic that's been really raging on for almost the past 3 years. We're going to be tackling the Russia Ukraine war. It's a serious topic. There's a lot to unpack for this one. So, without any further ado, my name is Theo, and let's start right away with the facts on this one.
And now the Uncut Podcast presented by Joe and Theo.
So, really, to start off on this one, like we always do on big topics like this, we really need a timeline of events to understand how we got to where we are today. So, the roots of the Russia Ukraine conflict really stretch back to 2014 when Russia really annexed Crimea following a highly disputed referendum. Now, this move triggered a wave of tensions between Russia and Ukraine as pro Russian separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk declared independence, really sparking a violent conflict in the Donbas region. Over the next several years, ceasefire agreements, most notably the Minsk Accords, really failed to bring lasting peace, with ongoing skirmishes and political discord keeping the region in a state of volatility. Then, coming closer to the modern times, on February 24th, 2022, Russia launched a full scale invasion of Ukraine, branding it a special military operation. Now, the opening days of the war really saw key battles, including the capture of Snake Island and the intense fight for control over the Antonov airport. By March and April of that year, Russian forces had besieged Mariupol, only to later withdraw from northern Ukraine, shifting their focus towards the eastern and southern fronts. By mid 2022, the tide of war really began to shift, with Ukraine regaining territory in Kherson and Kharkiv, while Russian forces solidified their hold in Luhansk. November of that year marked a significant turning point when Russian troops withdrew from the city of Kherson, suffering a major strategic setback. Throughout 2023, the battle for eastern Ukraine raged on, accompanied by escalating international sanctions against Russia. And in 2024, Ukraine launched counteroffensives in the Zaporizhia region, even as the war's human toll surpassed a staggering 1 million casualties. Now we're found in 2025, and the conflict continues to remain unresolved. Both sides continue to engage in fierce military operations, with Ukrainian drone strikes targeting Russian positions and Moscow pressing forward with its advances. The war has left a profound mark on global politics, really reshaping alliances and carrying immense human and economic costs. So, there's a big question now to ask: why do this in the first place? So, at the heart of Russia's invasion lies a deep seated fear of NATO's expansion. Since the 1990s, Russia has viewed NATO's steady eastward movement as an existential threat to its national security. The possibility of Ukraine joining the alliance became a red line for Moscow, exacerbating tensions that had been simmering for decades. Now, diplomatic negotiations aimed at addressing NATO's presence in Eastern Europe ultimately failed, further escalating the crisis. Beyond security concerns, Russia has framed its invasion as a mission to protect Russian speaking populations in both Donetsk and Luhansk, claiming they were victims of genocide at the hands of Ukraine. Moscow has justified its actions under the banner of humanitarian intervention, trying this narrative to its broader claim of denazification of Ukraine, an assertion which is widely rejected by the international community. From a historical perspective, Vladimir Putin has repeatedly argued that Ukraine and Russia share an inseparable cultural and historical bond. He dismisses Ukraine's independence as a mere historical anomaly, portraying its growing ties with the West as a direct challenge to its true sovereignty. In Russia's view, Ukraine has been manipulated by Western powers seeking to weaken and isolate Russia, a perspective reinforced by Moscow's depiction of the 2014 Maidan Revolution as a Western orchestrated coup. Ultimately, Russia has framed its invasion as a necessary preemptive security measure, an effort to prevent NATO from militarizing Ukraine and targeting and tightening its strategic encirclement of Russia. Now, while these justifications really form the backbone of Russia's rhetoric, the war's devastating consequences continue to unfold day in and day out, really reshaping global power dynamics in ways that will be felt for years to come. And now, speaking of these power dynamics, as we've discussed, because we've discussed a couple of conflicts on this show, there's always a puppeteer in these conflicts. And there's two, as always, in this situation. Those two being the United States and China. And we need to speak about them because they play an enormous role here. So let's begin by looking at the United States. Since the onset of the war, the United States has been Ukraine's most significant backer, providing extensive military, economic, and diplomatic support. As early 2025, the US has pledged over $76 billion in total aid, and with nearly $47 billion allocated for military assistance. Now, this includes advanced weaponry such as HIMARS rocket systems, Patriot missile batteries, Javelin and Stinger missiles, M1 Abrams tanks, and F 16 equipment. Now, US support has played a decisive role in Ukraine's counteroffensives, particularly in Kharkiv and Kherson. Additionally, Washington has provided crucial intelligence sharing, logistics, and military training, with over 50,000 Ukrainian troops trained in key operations like artillery coordination, drone warfare, and logistics management. Now, beyond direct military aid, the US has facilitated indirect support by coordinating NATO arms transfers, particularly Soviet era equipment compatible with Ukraine's extensive arsenal. Defense contractors like Boeing and Lockheed Martin have ramped up weapons production, ensuring continued supplies to Ukraine. Meanwhile, American cybersecurity firms, such as Microsoft, for example, have helped Ukraine bolster its defenses against Russian cyber attacks. If we look at the economic side of things, economically speaking, the US has funneled over $23 billion into Ukraine's financial stability, really covering budget support, government salaries, and social services. The International Monetary Fund and World Bank, backed by Washington, have provided multi billion-dollar loans to sustain Ukraine's economy. The US has also played a crucial role in energy security, really supplying liquefied natural gas and investing in critical energy infrastructure to mitigate the impact of Russian attacks on Ukraine's power grid. Westinghouse, for example, which is an American company, has stepped in to provide nuclear fuel, reducing Ukraine's reliance on Russian energy supplies. If we look on the humanitarian front, over $3.9 billion has been allocated for displaced Ukrainians, ensuring access to food, medical supplies, housing, and emergency aid. USAID has led coordinated efforts focusing on winter assistance, including fuel and generators, to help civilians endure Russian bombardments on critical infrastructure. Now, diplomatically, the US has spearheaded global coalition building efforts through the Ukraine Defense Contract Group, securing military and financial support from over 50 allied nations. At the United Nations specifically, the US has pushed for resolutions condemning Russian aggression and worked to diplomatically isolate Moscow. Sanctions have been a key part of the US strategy here, targeting Russia's energy, finance, and technology sectors, freezing over $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves and restricting Russian access to Western financial systems. Now, politically speaking, the US support for Ukraine has remained bipartisan, though debates continue over spending oversight and future aid commitments. Now, with the inauguration of President elect Donald Trump in 2025, uncertainty looms over America's long term involvement. And we're going to speak about this more in detail later on. Early reports suggest the new administration may prioritize negotiations within the first 100 days, potentially shifting U.S. strategy towards diplomatic resolutions. Now, we've spoken about the U.S., but what about the second puppeteer, being China? Well, China has really maintained a diplomatic neutrality stance throughout the war, carefully balancing the ties with both Russia and the West. While Beijing has refrained from directly condemning Moscow, it has consistently called for a peaceful resolution, sovereignty respect, and dialogue based solutions. For example, in February 2023, China proposed a 12-point peace plan, advocating for a ceasefire, renewed talks, and lifting of sanctions. However, the plan did not address Russia's aggression, leading to skepticism from Western nations. China has also abstained from multiple UN votes condemning Russian actions, further reinforcing doubts about its true neutrality. Now, despite its official neutrality, China's economic relationship with Russia has expanded significantly. Trade between the two nations reached $190 billion dollars in 2022, with projections surpassing $200 billion by 2024. Chinese imports of Russian oil surged over 30%, making Russia China's top oil supplier by mid 2024. This is largely due to steep discounts offered by Moscow, which has sought alternative buyers after being cut off from Western energy markets. Now, the Power of Siberia pipeline is an example of this, which has already facilitated major gas exports to China. And with ongoing work on Power of Siberia 2, expected to deliver 50 billion cubic meters annually, this relationship is continuing to strengthen. Now, beyond oil and gas, China has also increased purchases of Russian wheat, fertilizers, and minerals, while leasing Russian farmland for food production. Militarily, China and Russia have also deepened defense cooperation, conducting joint exercises in the Sea of Japan, the South China Sea, and the Arctic. Now, these drills underscore their shared interest in countering U.S. military influence, particularly in the Indo Pacific region. Now, while China has not officially supplied weapons for Russia's war efforts, Chinese firms have provided non lethal military aid, including drones, which have been used on the battlefield. Russia, on the other hand, remains a key supplier of advanced weaponry to China, including S 400 missile systems and Su 35 fighter jets, reinforcing Beijing's military capabilities. China's state controlled media, on the other hand, has also largely aligned with Russian narratives, blaming NATO expansion as a root cause of the war while criticizing Western economic sanctions as a destabilizing measure. However, internal discussions among Chinese policymakers and scholars reflect concerns over excessive alignment with Russia, as Beijing risks isolating itself from European markets, or even worse, provoking a more aggressive US containment strategy. Strategically, China views its relationship with Russia as part of a broader effort to counterbalance US global influence. Beijing has expanded its reach in the global south, positioning itself as a leading alternative to Western financial systems. By advocating non interference in sovereign affairs, China has strengthened ties with nations in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, seeking to reduce Western dependency. Financially, China has helped Russia bypass Western sanctions, with over 80% of their bilateral trade now being conducted in yuan and rubles, reducing reliance on the US dollar, obviously. Chinese banks have also extended credit lines to Russian companies struggling under Western financial restrictions. Now, if we look beyond trade and energy, China and Russia have intensified cooperation in technology, infrastructure, and space. Huawei, for example, has played a crucial role in Russia's 5G expansion, while Chinese companies continue supplying semiconductors and electronics despite Western restrictions. The two nations are also advancing space exploration partnerships, planning a joint lunar research station and satellite collaborations. Now, in the long term, the China Russia alliance represents a significant challenge to the US global influence, creating an emerging multipolar world order that really redefines traditional power structures. Now, while the US actively works to weaken Russia's economy and support Ukraine's military, China's deepening economic and strategic cooperation with Moscow ensures Russia remains a viable global player, complicating the trajectory of the war and its long term geopolitical implications. On that note, what are the geopolitics being played here by the two players? We saw how they're really related to each of their respective sides, but what's in it geopolitically for these two puppeteers? Well, the US views Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a direct challenge to global stability, sovereignty, and international law. Allowing unchecked aggression risks emboldening expansionist ambitions worldwide, threatening not just Ukraine, but the broader international order. Washington's support for Ukraine aligns with its commitment to countering authoritarianism, strengthening NATO, and upholding democratic principles. Strategically, the war has revitalized NATO's purpose, leading to increased defense spending and a stronger military presence along the alliance's eastern flank. The US has played a central role in this, working closely with allies like Poland, Romania, and Germany, whose $100 billion defense fund marked a turning point in European military policy. Now, American intelligence has warned of Russia's broader ambitions beyond Ukraine, with concerns about potential threats to Moldova and Georgia, reinforcing the need to contain Russian influence. Now, beyond military, energy security has been a critical factor here. Prior to the war, Europe depended on Russian energy, with 40% of its natural gas supply coming from Moscow. In response, the US significantly increased liquefied natural gas exports to Europe, which by mid 2023 accounted for over 50% of European energy imports. Now, this shift reduced Russia's leverage while strengthening US European energy ties. Simultaneously, Washington led sweeping sanctions across Russia, like we've seen and we've talked about before, freezing $300 billion in central bank reserves and targeting key sectors like oil, gas, and finance, really to weaken Moscow's economic foundation. Now, on the battlefield, US military aid has included advanced weaponry, intelligence sharing, and training programs to strengthen Ukraine's defense capabilities. Cybersecurity has also been a major focus, with the US assisting Ukraine in repelling Russian cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns. Now, the digital front in today's world is as crucial as the physical one, protecting both Ukraine's infrastructure and global cybersecurity networks. Now, maintaining global credibility is another key aspect for US involvement. Support for Ukraine sends a message to allies and adversaries alike, particularly in Asia, where Taiwan closely watches Washington's response to authoritarian threats. Additionally, US policy has sought to prevent nuclear escalation, reinforcing global norms against nuclear weapons use, especially in light of Russian rhetoric about tactical strikes. Economically speaking, US assistance to Ukraine, as we've seen before, has exceeded $76 billion by late 2024, providing financial stability, infrastructure rebuilding, and humanitarian aid for refugees. Companies like BlackRock and JP Morgan are also involved in post war reconstruction efforts. More than $14 billion has been allocated to displaced Ukrainians, covering food, medical supplies, and emergency repairs to mitigate the war's devastating effects. Ultimately speaking, here, US involvement is a multifaceted strategy aimed at countering Russian influence, securing energy independence, strengthening NATO, and shaping a global order that deters future conflicts. By supporting Ukraine, Washington seeks to reinforce democratic values and maintain strategic leadership in an increasingly multipolar world. For China, however, China's position on the Russia Ukraine war is shaped by its broader geopolitical ambition to challenge US dominance while strengthening its own global influence. Beijing's growing partnership with Moscow, formalized in their 2022 No Limits Agreement, reflects a strategic alignment aimed at undermining Western led institutions. Now, while China has avoided direct military intervention, it has supported Russia through economic, energy, and diplomatic channels, carefully maintaining a stance that bolsters Moscow without triggering Western retaliation. Energy security is a key pillar of this partnership. Sanctions on Russian energy exports have benefited China, allowing it to secure discounted oil, gas, and coal deals, imports that exceed $80 billion in 2023. Long term deals such as the Power of Siberia, as we've seen, the Power of Siberia pipeline, and its planned expansion, have reinforced China's energy independence while reducing reliance on the Middle East. This access to stable energy sources is critical for China's economic growth and industrial stability. China has also played a crucial role in mitigating the impact of Western sanctions on Russia. Trade between the two nations has surpassed $200 billion in 2024, with Beijing promoting the yuan in cross border transactions, really to reduce reliance on the US dollar. A key milestone was the 2023 China Russia agreement to settle energy trade in yuan, further challenging Western financial dominance. Now, while China officially denies providing military aid, it has supplied dual use technologies that have indirectly supported Russia's war effort. This includes drones, semiconductors, and telecommunications equipment, technologies that help sustain Russian military operations without really violating international sanctions outright. Beyond Russia, China has leveraged the war to expand its influence in Central Asia, traditionally within Moscow's sphere. With Russia preoccupied, Beijing has deepened its ties with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, positioning itself as a stabilizing force in the region. Now, this maneuver not only weakens Russia's grip, but also enhances China's strategic reach. The conflict itself has also influenced China's Arctic ambitions. Now, as climate change opens new trade routes and energy opportunities, China views Russia as a gateway to the Arctic. Collaborative projects like the Yamal LNG development give Beijing access to untapped resources while bypassing Western controlled corridors. Diplomatically speaking, China has maintained strategic ambiguity, rhetorically supporting Russia while avoiding direct involvement. Abstaining from UN resolutions condemning Moscow and promoting initiatives like its 12-point peace plan in February 2023, Beijing has sought to present itself as a neutral mediator while subtly backing Russia. This calculated position allows China to avoid major Western repercussions while benefiting from the ongoing geopolitical shifts. China has also used multilateral platforms like the BRICS to push for an alternative global financial system. At the 2023 BRICS summit, Beijing advocated for expanded trade in local currencies, challenging the US dollar's dominance. This, along with growing military and space cooperation with Russia, signals a broader effort to reshape global power structures. Now, ultimately, China's response to the Ukrainian war reflects its long term strategy, strengthening economic and strategic ties with Russia while avoiding direct conflict with the West. By deepening economic partnerships, securing vital resources, and promoting multipolar world order narratives, China aims to maximize its influence in a way that aligns with its broader geopolitical ambitions. Now, as the war continues, Beijing remains focused on leveraging the situation to advance its global standing, securing energy and trade advantages while carefully managing its relationship with both Russia and the West. Now, walking into 2025 has brought about some major changes to the geopolitics in this conflict, essentially, and we need to speak about those. So, looking at the US, the shifting focus of US foreign policy between the Middle East and Eastern Europe has profound implications for the Russia Ukraine war. A critical factor in this dynamic is the fall of the Bashar al Assad regime in Syria. Historically, the US has prioritized the Middle East due to its strategic location, vast energy reserves, and counterterrorism concerns. The collapse of the Assad regime has created a power vacuum of sorts, leading to heightened competition among Turkey, Iran, and the Gulf states. Such instability is likely to necessitate continued U.S. involvement, redirecting military and diplomatic resources away from Eastern Europe. A distracted United States could embolden Russia to escalate its aggression in Ukraine, exploiting the perceived weakening of Western deterrence. Now, energy diplomacy further complicates the geopolitical balancing act. The US has actively pursued European energy independence to reduce reliance on Russian exports, but a renewed focus on Middle Eastern energy routes could disrupt this strategy. A stabilized Middle East could introduce alternative energy sources for Europe, potentially diminishing both Russian and American energy dominance and reshaping power dynamics between energy producing nations and dependent European markets. Adding another layer here is the legacy of Donald Trump's presidency as his America First foreign policy. Trump's tenure saw a recalibration of U.S. global commitments, emphasizing domestic interest over international military obligations. His skepticism towards NATO, which was exemplified by his 2018 criticism of Allied defense spending, cast uncertainty over U.S. support for European security. Ukraine, in particular, faced unpredictability in military aid and diplomatic backing, a reality starkly illustrated by the 2019 temporary withholding of military assistance. Now, while Trump's rhetoric often avoided direct condemnation of Vladimir Putin, institutional actions such as sanctions imposed for the annexation of Crimea and election interference demonstrated continued pressure on Moscow. This duality may have encouraged Russia to test U.S. resolve concerning Ukraine. Broader U.S. geopolitical shifts also influenced the Russia Ukraine conflict. The Trump administration distanced itself from multilateral institutions, questioning NATO's collective defense clause and shifting strategic focus towards countering China. The formation of the Quad alliance with Japan, Australia, and India really exemplified this realignment. As a result, resources and strategic attention moved toward the Indo Pacific, leaving Ukraine and Eastern Europe comparatively more vulnerable. Domestic factors also have played a crucial role in shaping U.S. foreign policy. American war fatigue, exacerbated by prolonged conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, reduced public support for overseas military engagements. Economic pressures, including inflation and infrastructure demands, fueled debates over prioritizing domestic spending over foreign commitments. The economic return on military and financial aid to Ukraine was frequently questioned, intensifying calls for a reassessment of U.S. global engagements. Now, these geopolitical and domestic shifts have created both opportunities and risks in the Russia Ukraine war. A reduced U.S. presence could really embolden Russia to intensify its aggression, interpreting American disengagement as a sign of weakened resolve. Similarly, uncertainty about U.S. commitment to NATO could create rifts among member states, undermining collective actions. In response, Europe may be compelled to take on a greater leadership role in Ukraine's defense. The broader global ramifications of shifting U.S. focus are equally significant as nations reassess their reliance on American security guarantees, recalibrating alliances and strategic partnerships. Now, ultimately, the interplay between U.S. strategic priorities, domestic political shifts, and global power realignments continues to shape the trajectory of the Russia Ukraine war. Whether the U.S. remains steadfast in its commitment to European security or redirects its focus elsewhere will determine the future balance of power on the global stage. Now, China's position is interesting in this situation. China's position in the Middle East has long been shaped by strategic calculations, and its support for the Assad regime is no exception. Through diplomatic backing, including vetoing UN resolutions against Assad, China maintained its influence in Syria, a critical node in its broader Middle Eastern strategy. Syria's role in the Belt and Road Initiative and its access to vital energy resources made it a key investment for Beijing. However, China carefully avoided direct military involvement, prioritizing economic and political interests instead. Assad's fall weakens China's regional foothold. Its investments in Syria's reconstruction are now at risk. And a Western or Turkish aligned government could significantly diminish its leverage in the region. To counterbalance these risks, China is likely to deepen its ties with other regional players, such as Iran. At the same time, a return of Trump to the presidency could further alter China's strategic calculations. His previous approach to deprioritizing NATO and emphasize domestic concerns, potentially granting Russia greater freedom in Ukraine while straining transatlantic alliances, could present China with an opportunity to expand its influence in Europe, filling the gaps left by weakened US commitments. On the military front, China's growing assertiveness in the Taiwan Strait, including large scale exercises and simulated blockades, reflects its intention to detour US interference in this region. Economically, a renewed trade war under Trump could push China closer to Russia, reinforcing their partnership in response to US unpredictability. China's role in the Russia Ukraine conflict remains one of strategic alignment rather than overt military engagement. Its opposition to Western dominance naturally aligns with Russia's goal, and the fall of the Assad regime could further deepen their partnership as they jointly counterbalance Western influence. China has so far refrained from providing direct military aid to Russia, instead, offering financial and strategic support in ways that avoid provoking Western sanctions, as we've seen before. Meanwhile, if US focus shifts back to the Middle East, China could seize the opportunity to expand its presence in Eastern Europe. Infrastructure projects, trade agreements, and energy investments under the Belt and Road Initiative would allow China to position itself as a crucial player in Ukraine's most post conflict recovery, challenging Western influence in the region. Beyond the immediate conflicts, China's broader geopolitical objectives center around securing energy resources and promoting a multipolar world order. Its alignment with Russia ensures a stable supply of oil and gas, particularly as Western influence in Europe fluctuates. Now, if NATO attention on Eastern Europe declines under Trump, China could move more freely in securing long term energy deals with Russia, strengthening its energy security. More broadly speaking, China seeks to redefine global governance by presenting itself as a stabilizing force amid Western unpredictability. Through multilateral initiatives such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Belt and Road Initiative. So ultimately, the geopolitical shifts brought about by the fall of the Assad regime and the new Trump presidency pose both challenges and opportunities for China. Now, while regional instability in the Middle East could threaten Beijing's investments and influence within that region, these developments also create openings for China to expand its reach in Europe and beyond. Now, obviously, throughout this entire, I would tend to say, first half of the podcast, we really looked at the facts of what is going on. But there's still a lot to discuss here. And for this section of the podcast, I want to bring on my incredible co host, Joe. Joe, welcome to the episode. I know it's a very big and interesting topic, and I want to kind of start it off right off the bat with kind of a difficult question to kick us off. Based on the changes that are happening, based on the changing dynamics and events in the past couple of weeks, let's say since we entered into 2025 and the news that we've been seeing, what do you think is going to happen? I know it's a difficult thing to say because, again, anything can happen in these situations. But based on what we know, what could be a possible trajectory essentially for what is going on?
Oh, it's good to be back. Hi, everyone. It's a good question. Bit of a complex answer is what I'm going to give on this whole
Which is the point
situation,
of the discussion.
right?
It's the point.
There's no right or well. I mean, there is probably a wrong answer. That would be nuclear war and fallout, and then we're living in Fallout 76. But like, let's not go to that one. A more realistic approach is that nothing happens. And what do I mean by that? It's just kind of this war is still going to be contained within Ukraine and Russia. It's going to stay between Ukraine and Russia for as long as Russia feels necessary to fund it. right? Or I guess basically as long as Putin is in power, um, I would assume. I don't think his predecessors feel the same um, kind of pressure to reobtain Ukraine. Um, that's the logical response to this, right? Because I feel like escalation would be drastic. And the reason why I'm saying this is because, if we're hearing what reports are to be believed is that North Korea troops are, helping out the Russian military, which is a bit of a concern.
Yep.
If you're NATO alliances, because now another country's getting involved into this battle, and now it's should they dip a foot into it? And by maybe not the United States, but we've heard I want to say
France.
President Macron. Is it
What?
president or prime
Yeah,
minister?
a
Because I can
president.
never tell what the
I think it's a president or prime
president.
minister,
So
if I'm
President
not
Emmanuel.
mistaken. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, because I think France is. Oh, no, I think France is the only one that has two. There's a president and there's a prime minister in France. Anyways, regardless. So yeah, President Emmanuel Macron basically saying that you know, hey, we're going to start sending our troops. And then that can really lead to an escalation pretty quickly if that were to be the case, because, France is getting involved. Potentially other neighboring countries are going to get involved that are part of that NATO alliance, which might leave the door open for the United States to get involved, which could see, kind of like what you were alluding to, right? Could see China get involved, can see Iran get involved. Um, and could lead the door to something I don't think anybody would want, and that could potentially be nuclear warfare. Um, I don't think it's going to escalate that far. I don't see it escalating that far just because of what the consequences would mean for everybody. And at the end of the day, I think, um, you still want to be alive by the end of this. So I don't see that ultimately happening. There's too many um, obstacles in the way for that to occur. And I think there's too much on the line for that to occur. I think level heads are going to prevail in that sense. But yeah, in terms of escalational points, um, I mean, like I said, I just feel like it's still going to be contained within that region. I don't think you're going to see a situation where it's going to be like, they're going to start having breakouts in Belarus, or they're going to have breakouts elsewhere. I think it's still going to be contained within that Donetsk kind of warfare battle. I don't think we're going to see it really kind of escalate past that point. I don't think we're going to see Ukraine break into Russia, and I don't think we're going to see Russia push too much into Ukraine. I think it's just going to be a war of nutrition, and whoever breaks first. I don't think we're going to see what's kind of going on. Just kind of maybe to allude to it a bit, because we've talked about it so much already. Kind of what was going on in the Middle East, right? Where you've seen Israel kind of, you know, attacking Palestine.
Mm.
And I guess now maybe they're a little bit bored with Palestine, so they want to go ahead and go with Lebanon. We've seen them attack a little bit into uh, Syria, uh, and we know their history with Iran. So there's a whole bunch of situations going out there, and you're seeing little pockets of destruction take place. But in terms of the Ukraine Russia war, honest answer with you, like we've seen it for the last going
Three
on
years.
4 years now,
Yeah.
right? I think it's going to still stay within that pocket of the Donetsk region. I don't think it's going to break out further, and I think it's just basically going to be a war of nutrition at this point.
Right. I think there's going to be, well, here's the thing. It's a difficult question, like you said, and I want to touch on a couple of points here. Broadly speaking, what I think is happening. I think what we're going to see eventually is Ukraine being split. It sounds crazy to say, but I really think that what's going to happen is portion of Ukraine is going to go back to Russia, and the
Well,
other portion is going to essentially enter NATO. That's the broad thing that I'm seeing, because if you look at kind of the rhetoric that's been coming out, at least from the United States, especially with President-elect Donald Trump, there seems to be a shift of interest, at least from the US's perspective. Right? Initially, Ukraine, at least in my opinion, right, was seen as a very strategic point, especially for You've heard of the infamous Belts and Roads Initiative coming out of
Yeah,
China.
yeah,
So essentially, what that initiative is, because we need to explain it so that people understand what I'm going for here. Essentially, it's an enormous infrastructure project that China started and is trying to bring in partners such as Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Russia. The goal is to build infrastructure such as roads, train networks, and all of that to essentially bridge mainland China to essentially Western markets. Because right now, the only way that, let's say, Chinese goods can really make it quickly without having to pass multiple borders into Europe, for example, is by boat. And that takes very long, right? So if you have like a train network, that can potentially go faster, especially if you overcome and overpass borders. So call me crazy here, but the initial move, we know for a fact, right, that Russia is backed by China. Statistically speaking, especially since the onset of the Russia Ukraine war, their trade between the two nations is by far exceeding anything that it was in the past. Russia is the number one oil exporter to China. China is the number one supporter, essentially helping Russia avoid the sanctions that were placed on it, essentially. Enormous trade between the two of them in yuan and rubles. So they're really supporting each other. Russia is known to send military equipment to China, Sukhoi fighter jets, so on and so forth. I think the move initially, although labeled as from Putin as annexation, hey, Ukraine was always part of Russia, I think was more a move for these two nations to try and capture Ukraine to make their entry into Europe a lot easier. Which is why I think the US stepped in so quickly and NATO stepped in so quickly to blockade that. What I think is happening now, just to close my thought off here, is I think that the US is starting to look at Ukraine as not that big of a strategic benefit to them. I think the US is starting to say, okay, hold on. This war, I essentially have many battlefronts right now because the US's main enemy is China. We know that. The biggest competition they have is China. What the US is seeing, and we can talk about China a bit, what the US is seeing is I have a major conflict that's occurring in Ukraine. I have a major conflict that's occurring with Israel. Israel is causing essentially a lot of turmoil in the Middle East. And I also have now worries in South Korea and potentially Taiwan. So I cannot have 20 different battles going on around the world. I need to focus on a couple. So I think what we'll see is a sacrificial lamb, so to speak, of Ukraine. All right, Russia, here's the areas you want, but the rest of Ukraine is coming into NATO, and we're putting a blockade on that to block you there, and we're turning our attention to the Middle East for the most part. I think that's what we're seeing.
well, okay, I'm gonna ask you to elaborate on a couple of stuff.
Sure, sure, of course.
Obviously, a couple of your points there. Um, but I'm just gonna at least answer what the main point you were trying to make, where you can see U.S. take a portion of Ukraine. U.S. Sorry, Russia take a portion of Ukraine,
Mm,
and then the other portion going to NATO. Um, I don't see that being ridiculous, right? Because if you look at the dynamics of Ukraine, there's already a portion of Ukraine that kind of feels like they belong more to Russia, which is the Donetsk region.
yeah.
That feels like they belong more to Russia than they do Ukraine, right? So, is it far fetched to assume that? No, this is kind of like the same thing like with Crimea
Mm,
at the time, right? I think a large portion of Crimea was they viewed themselves as Russian, right? So, kind of, in 2014, made sense for Russia to kind of go in and say, okay, you're part of us, the annexation of Crimea and all that. But is it a ridiculous thought, or to say it's too far fetched to believe that Russia will leave with the Donetsk region? Um, no, I wouldn't say it's a ridiculous trade off to end the war. Um, but again, it's not what Russia would want. I think if you look at it, it's let's be honest. I understand the point of view is that he's doing this because he wants to establish the old USSR and obtain the USSR, and that was his promise to the Russian people. But come on, let's be brutally honest with each other here. This is strategically for resources, and I think like we talk about this quite a bit, right? Like when you take these geopolitical courses and you take these environmental courses. I don't know about you, but I know from my background, I needed to. Uh, you take economics of the environment and you
Yeah.
study resource analysis and all this type of stuff. Uh, Not to bore people with it, but you know, you learn quick. Like this is stuff they talk about. Like why would World War III be obtained? Right? World War I was obtained because people at that time, uh, like we haven't really had a war in a while, right? And people saw World War I like, oh, okay, like it's just going to be a little vacation and we're going to go adventure, and it was nothing like that. World War II was fought over the power of right and wrong and religion. I would say, as well as kind of what we saw now, right? Power. You know, the next world war would be fought over general resources, and uh, and that's basically what this is. Why would you want to obtain Ukraine other than the natural resources they produce, the oil that's there,
They
the
don't
gas
have,
that's there?
however, they don't have oil and gas in that amount to really shift the needle for Russia. What they do have, I will agree with you, is wheat. They're one of the biggest wheat exporters, and wheat is at the basis of a lot of food products, right? However, I find it very. I somewhat agree with you, but I think the more strategic reason for grabbing Ukraine is a gateway to Europe,
It's a gateway to Europe,
right?
yes, but it also keeps the resources trade wise out of NATO. If Ukraine were to join NATO,
Yeah, of course, strategically, yeah, I will agree with you on that. Yeah,
strategically, yes, it makes the most sense. And Russia also wants to expand, right?
yeah,
They kind of have Belarus in their grip. So obviously, as a trade partner, it makes sense, right? They're getting a better price on what trades and goods. Same thing for Ukraine. Obviously, you would want Ukraine to be part, you know,
yeah,
because of that trade and services. I get it. Maybe there's not massive amounts of gas and natural resources like but there still is natural resources
yeah. There's still, yeah, of course,
there.
there's still something.
And
Yeah,
the question is, you don't know how much of a supply Russia has left either, right? Like we do. Let's be honest. Me and you both don't know, right? They can discover oil wells tomorrow that can, create massive amounts of wealth.
well,
That's
yeah,
kind of the way it works,
they're
right?
constantly discovering. Well, I wouldn't say constantly discovering, but they
No,
are
but they're
discovering.
constantly
Yeah,
drilling and they're discovering uh, new oil pockets here and there to produce crude oil and petroleum and all this other type of stuff. But at the end of the day, like that natural resource is dwindling more and more and more and more because we don't have the technology to fully drill into the whole area of that pocket.
yeah, and
Right?
also kind of we're consuming a lot more of that natural resource than it's naturally replenishing itself. However,
Yeah. And you're using oil for a lot of things. And this is kind of why I was kind of going to go into your China
yeah,
subject here. Um, and why is it important for China? China relies so heavily on oil for
yeah,
production of goods and services. Well, they're goods. More importantly, that's how a lot of things are fabricated nowadays is using oil,
yeah.
right? And then not to mention the transportation costs, the factory costs, crude oil itself, petroleum, the cost of shipping, and all this type of stuff. So it is a general resource that China lacks and requires. And they understand their best trade partner is Russia because of the United States' opinion on the
Well,
CCP
the
in
sanctions,
Russia.
right?
Yeah, well, sanctions, but also because of the CCP government in China and the relationship with the U.S. government, they know a relationship will never be built there, right? As long as Russia still is supplying the resources to China. But we can both agree that if Russia stops supplying the resources to China, China still needs to obtain this resource somehow,
Yeah, which is why they have Iran as well.
which is why they have Iran. But the question is, can Iran support all the oil that China needs,
Right. That's a very
right?
good point. Yeah.
So what would be left for China at that point? It might be to make friends with the enemy at that point to keep their economic alive,
Yeah.
right? And it would benefit the United States because then they can put restrictions in place to help reduce their battle. And because you were just saying it too, and I'm jumping point to point to point, but I'm just kind of trying to touch up on all the points you were also trying to say,
Yeah.
right? Where you're saying the U.S. is battling on multiple fronts, and you said China's their biggest battle. I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on that sentiment.
Okay.
I think, or I'm going to maybe change the wording of what you were trying to say. China's their biggest economical battle on an economical front. I don't think China scares them military wise, and nor do I think China is interested in fighting the United States on a military battle. However, in terms of military, in terms of manpower, military
Physical
power,
manpower, yeah.
physical manpower, let's say, or physical human power, I guess 2024.
Numbers.
2025. It would still be Russia. I think Russia's always been and will always be the biggest threat to
Military
the United
threat
States.
to the United States, yeah.
In terms of danger, in terms of danger, I think, and I think that's kind of maybe what you were trying to say when you said China's their biggest threat, and I think you were trying to allude to economically because I can't see China. Especially with everything goes on between China and India, and then that kind of blockade and that kind of region and that kind of warfare that goes on, where China's really interested in fighting the United States
in the Indo-Pacific, essentially.
Yeah, in a military battle, I can't see that happening.
Yeah,
I don't see it's not in China's best interest to do so, and I think they're fully aware of that. But I think economically speaking, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
I think the biggest threat to the United States is China. But I think in terms of military, it's Russia and the United States. And again, just kind of going back to the news, and I know we were talking about talking about this whole why is Russia still so adamant on obtaining Ukraine, right? And we made that point with NATO, but I also want to kind of make the point what's been coming out in the news recently with the United States and them kind of wanting to obtain Canada as a 51st state. And, potentially even Mexico, depending on, it was Gulf of Mexico.
The Gulf of the United States.
Gulf of the Americas. Yeah. Why is there so much talk around that? And I think it's because Canada has a vast amount of resources available too, natural resources, obviously.
Yeah.
With
same
timber,
thing with Mexico, especially in the Gulf of Mexico.
With Mexico, and it's a bit frightening because I feel like, I know we're trying to be a serious podcast. And I'm going to keep it serious, but I also want to make this point too. Fallout, the game by Bethesda.
It feels like we're heading towards Fallout 4's.
Yeah. No, it does. But
so we better start stocking up on bottle caps. Essentially, that's what you're saying.
Oh, maybe not bottle caps, but maybe nuke shelters first. but no. But to come back to making it serious though, think about it. We keep saying that the planet's oil resource is dwindling, and it's dwindling fast and at a rapid rate. That's why, we're trying to figure out different solutions, right? Solar power homes, not solar power cars. I don't think we're there yet, but electric cars. We're trying to change that to the point now, like Tesla is doing the semi trucks. I think they're working on that.
They've been working on that since 2019, or trying to get something.
We're trying to, and we know how difficult that is with freight shipment and how that functions. But oil is going to be the reason why we go to World War III, because every country relies on it, right? And it's such an important resource, and Russia knows that. They have a large part of it. I think Gazprom is the largest in Russia, right? And then,
but that's natural gas.
But still, it
Yeah.
doesn't natural gas. It's still a natural resource that's
It
required,
is.
right?
It is. It is. What
Uh,
I want to kind of clarify this small point to the audience. Russia is the number three in the world in terms of oil production, and I think number four, number three again in natural gas. For those that kind of don't know the clear distinction, oil is used in the production of everyday items. For example, the asphalt you drive on, well, that's an oil byproduct. The plastic you use or consume, that's an oil byproduct. Natural gas is more used in terms of generating power. So, power generators, electricity generation, heating, which is why when this war started, and Russia essentially came out and closed the gas valves, sending natural gas into Europe. Essentially, all of Europe had an energy crisis. And there were fears that they weren't going to have enough heat, especially the northern countries, for their winter, right? But that I just wanted to make that distinction. Both are extremely important. And you're right. It is a concerning thing, but but what I'm
but
tending to see is this is just playing into the strategy of trying of two powers, US and China, correctly like you said, battling it out in terms of economics and essentially power and dominance around the world.
that's just it. I'm going to leave
Yeah,
China maybe a little bit alone for this next part, and I
yeah,
want to bring it back to China, Russia, and the United States because this is a
sure.
battle that's as longest time, and then we'll come back
Yeah,
to
yeah.
China. For the United States, right? Like you said, Europe lost a lot of that natural
Yes.
gas, lost a lot of that oil, which was responsible for a lot of the cars driving, the asphalt production, as well as you know the natural gas. So they had to go obtain it from somewhere else, which, if I'm not mistaken, was the United States,
Yes. Yep.
and that's kind of why you know their prices rose, their cost of living increases because it's harder to get natural gas and oil from the US where it has to cross an ocean,
It
be
needs to be
delivered.
liquefied by boats and all that instead of going straight from a pipe.
Exactly, it's not the same, right?
Yep.
So obviously their price goes up, and it plays into Russia's hands because now, hey, China loves it because it's more energy for them, right? Iran loves it; it's more for them too. So it helps out Russia's allies, but it doesn't really help out Russia that much because they also lost a massive income stream
Exactly.
with the European export of it. And for the United States, it's even more fantastic because, hey, they can now, you know, find a way to increase their economy by exporting this. So, it creates that problem. And then it kind of plays into their hands then with the whole economical power struggle between the United States and Russia. Sorry, China, and that situation. So yeah, a lot.
Yeah, of course.
It's
Yeah,
to me,
it's
this is kind of like a battle of resources more than it is a battle of wits. And
yes. Yeah.
you know, when the first nuke gets dropped, is because something drastic is going to happen. And I don't think we're there yet. I like I said, I still think this is very confined. But man, if it keeps to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle as we see, I think we're going to be in for maybe a rude awakening quicker than
We think.
sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and
It's not. It's not. That's not even a I think moment. It's
a scary possibility. It's actually
no. I wouldn't even call it a scary possibility. I'd call it a fact. I think the moment you start seeing, and especially now with Trump in office, and God knows how the way that can go and is erratic, and the way he speaks, how erratic it could be, dude. If gas prices continue to rise and the consumption keeps going up and up and up and up, because we need to drive bigger, faster cars, we need to prove to people that we consume quicker than we can produce, dude. At some point, wars start over this.
yeah.
Is it unrealistic to think in your mind that very quickly this can escalate?
No,
You
not
know,
at all. Not at all.
No, not no. So wait, are you agreeing or disagreeing? Sorry.
No, agreeing, agreeing.
Okay.
It's not
I was
out
gonna
of the
say,
context at all that this could
yeah,
escalate very
that's what I'm trying.
rapidly, right?
That's what I'm trying to say. It's like you have to look at the world's. Like I know this is a Russia Ukraine subject, and I want to keep it to that, but
It's
you
hard to.
can't. No. But you can't have this conversation without understanding this portion of
Yeah.
it. And I know we alluded to a lot of the different I'm sorry if I'm forgetting words right now. The different parties involved into this whole situation, right? China, U.S., Russia, Ukraine, France, North Korea, South Korea. I know we didn't really talk about those two too much, and we'll probably
Yeah.
get into that a little bit later, me and
Yep.
you and I. But I just want to say it's like it's so crucial to understand this perspective of it because this is what's going to ultimately lead to the massive escalation that I think nobody wants to get to. If the United States, like, if people in the United States are realizing, oh shit, we're paying more and more and more for gas, like, even here where we're from, gas prices are increasing substantially. Look at 2020, and granted, different reasons,
Yeah.
but look at 2020 till now.
Yeah.
Right, 2020, what it was almost point. I think at one point it was like 0.86
Yeah.
per liter.
Yeah.
And we go today, it's like 1.7
Yeah.
per liter.
1.8
That's
sometimes.
1.8, and people are already getting a little bit scared. And we produce,
That
you
resource.
know, that resource in this country, and we're still paying that. So the United States. So I'm not saying today, but look at 4 more years down the road. Where are we then? How are people going to react? What's the global resource going to look like? Is it going to keep the dwindle? And as much as Elon wants to sit there and go like, well, we're producing, we're trying to do electric, we're trying to do electric. That it's scary to think.
Well, look, again, like I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of talking about electric vehicles and the electrification because that's a different topic altogether.
No, but I
Right?
still don't think that fixes your
It
problem, right?
doesn't.
Because
That's
you
exactly it.
talked
It
about
doesn't.
you still need oils
That's it. You still need it
or
for everyday products.
right, and it's not like oil regenerates itself. It's not
That's
like
it.
you can plant. It's not like I was gonna say it's not like you can plant a tree and it's gonna grow
Yeah,
again.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
even at that, when you plant a tree, it's still 20, 30 years till it regrows and it contributes back to when you cut it down.
Yep.
It's just we're consuming at such a velocity, at such a rate.
Yep.
And oil, out of all things, takes centuries to produce.
Millennia, actually, if you think about
Millennia,
it.
thank you. You're right. You need massive amounts of carcasses to dissolve into the ground, build the oil, build the crude oil. Like we're talking about, like, which was crazy to think about. At one point, we were talking about you would put a human. And I think this was out of China. Correct? I don't know if you've ever heard this idea before, but I'm going to say it.
Yeah.
Um, there was an idea floating around that when a human would die, you would put them in a kind of like a tree seed,
Okay.
and you would bury them in the ground, and then that
Oh, I've
would
seen of
produce
this.
oil. So, like to let people know how governments are thinking about this, because this is what's going to drive their GDP,
Yeah.
and it's what's going to drive their economy. And if you don't have that resource, like you can't produce a lot. Like yes, we can maybe find supplements and synthetic versions of it, but we're not there yet ultimately. So you know, it's not Environment Day, but I feel like maybe we should bring that up at some point. It's crucial to understand that I know Gutberg, Gretberg,
Greta Thunberg. Thunberg.
Greta
Yeah.
Thunberg. Um, I know some people go like, "Oh, she's crazy. She's 14 years old, and look at the way she's talking. She's, a tree hugger." But like, you really start to think, and you start going the ramifications that would follow. Um, and we're not even talking about trees being cut down and potentially losing bees and what that can mean for humanity. We're just talking about the simplicity of oil going lower, and and like you alluded to, if oil starts to run out in major pipelines, we know the massive amount of oil is found in the Middle East. That's going to be it's just going to be warfare.
Well, that's bringing me to the interesting topic because, like you said, although we want to keep it to Russia Ukraine, it's difficult, right? Because what's happening in Russia Ukraine, the events that are transpiring or the events that will transpire are a direct cause and effect of the Middle East as well, right? Because both China and the US correctly identified exactly what you said. They know how important natural resources like gas, oil, heck, even coal are, right? Still to this day, they know how important they are. The reality is that I think what the US is doing, and I think what China is doing, is they're choosing which battles to win. I think the US is aiming more to the Middle East for one reason. Think about it. You alluded to it initially, right? And I'm turning this to China and the US because behind Russia is China. Yes, Russia has a military might, but China has an economic might, correctly said, that's supporting Russia. If it wasn't for China, Russia would have gone bankrupt by now. For 3 years, it's costing them tens of billions per month to keep this running, right? So what's happening now is the US knows exactly what you said. China needs oil to continue its economic dominance that it has, its industrialization. The reason why China is powerful as it is because everything that's cheap, from the glassware we have to the microphone we're actually using right now, is possibly manufactured in China, right? For China to be able to do that, they need vast amounts of oil. Like you said, is it possible for Russia or Iran on their own to supply that oil to China that they need? We have doubts, right? So the US, all it needs to do to essentially force China to work with them or to dominate China is just break one of the two. Like you correctly said, Russia's a military powerhouse. Russia is no pushover on a military side. Iran, however, is compared to the US, right? So the US, what I think, and that's going back to the initial kind of thing that I said, where I think the US is ready to sacrifice Ukraine and say, you know what, Russia, here's half of Ukraine, right? Take it, but I'm going to burn the Middle East. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to put pressure specifically and topple Iran so that I can close China off from that second major producer that they need, right? To essentially keep their economic dominance so I can stop them.
Well, but before you continue your point, I just kind of want to
Yeah,
go back to what you said there for a
sure.
second. And so, sorry to cut you off before. Um, you said, yeah, I agree with you. Maybe Iran doesn't have as much of military force as Russia does, but um, this is kind of what I want to bring up.
Yeah,
Don't you feel like as this war with Ukraine has gone on, everybody's always been like, well, Russia, US, top two militaries in the world, most two dangerous militaries in the world. Does your opinion of the Russian military? Because I also kind of want to, talk about Russia, Ukraine a little bit.
yeah.
Do you think your opinion of the Russian military has changed, just seeing the way they've kind of been battling Ukraine? It like I think when this war broke out, we were all assuming within 2-3 days Kiev would fall,
Yeah.
right? Right, and here we are 3 years later, and it's like there's been no headway. There's been no movement. There's been no. Ukraine is standing force to force with the Russian military and putting up a battle to the point where I think they've pushed Russia back into Russia and even taken a bit of Russia. And I can agree with you when you like if the argument is basically, well, Russia has nukes. Yeah, that's the only agreement I can see, because like watching this from an outsider, and I'm not going to say Russia's military is garbage and all this type of stuff. That's ridiculous. But to call them a military force when they're going up, sorry, Ukraine. Ukraine isn't really ranked, you would say, military wise in that top half. But damn it, they have fight and they have
Yeah.
spirit, and they're fucking vicious. But do you maybe knock that sentiment of the Russian military down a couple pegs now?
Not too sure, and I'll tell you why. For one reason.
Nukes removed. By
Yeah,
the way,
nukes removed. We're not talking about
nukes.
a nuclear arsenal here. We're talking about
If you're looking, yeah, because if you're looking at nukes, completely different outcome to this,
Yeah.
right? I mean, but until you fire a nuke, it's like,
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to use the analogy. I'm trying to be professional.
Yeah. I mean, debatable for one reason. Let's not forget the numbers here, right? Ukraine has received close to $76 billion from essentially allies and NATO. 46 of that 76 billion was military aid, with the US essentially sending Abrams tanks, anti-aircraft missiles, advanced warfare training for logistics to its troops and all of that. So I would tend to say that if
Yeah, but
NATO had not gotten involved as quickly as they did, Ukraine wouldn't have lasted. Right? They didn't have the infrastructure or the power to stand against Russia. The reason
yeah,
why they're able to stand is because behind them is essentially NATO and the US, which is why again these change in rhetorics from Trump right now kind of put into question what's happening here, right?
but then don't you come back if you're basically telling me that this is well, I mean, it practically is kind of the U.S. masking itself to fight Russia in this sort of sense, and it's not, it's not U.S. troops, it's not U.S. training, it's not the full, uh, U.S. Army,
It's not
but
the
it
flag of
is.
the US there. Yeah.
Well, if it is, then we have massive issues going on.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to say it's still U.S. backed, more or
Yes.
less, not to a full extent, but it's still providing some aid. Don't you kind of look at that and go like, if this is just the small aid that the U.S. is providing, what would happen if it's the actual full blown U.S. military that goes in there?
Interesting. Yeah. No, I can
Right?
understand your point.
No, because it opens up a whole new can
Yeah.
of worms, right? Like, look at the struggle that's going on with just aid, right? We're not talking about the U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, all these other types of things getting involved physically, right? Maybe kind of from the shadows, sending in, like you said, fighter jets, anti missile, but it's not the whole fleet of it,
Yeah.
right? You're talking about now if you put in a whole fleet of this stuff going up against Russia, and maybe Russia's not putting in a full fleet either.
Exactly.
But I'm just trying to say is like, do you? What does that say? You know, does that say if a war were to break out that the United States could handle itself on that level? I personally think, yeah, they probably could. They're the number one military in the world for
They
a
are.
reason. Um, but again, you bring nukes into this, man. It's a whole different ballgame, and I think that's why nobody would get involved on that sense. On that sense,
I agree. I agree because the escalation and the result of that is nuclear warfare, which is the scariest thing you can imagine. Which is why I think the real battle is being played economically, right?
yes. But I before we, because I feel like we've touched on this quite a bit, and I also want to get to another point you were trying
Yeah.
to allude to with the Middle East and the war in the mid and why the Middle East is a massive factor. And I'm sorry, I took it away from you.
Yeah.
I apologize. I'm so sorry about that. But yes, you're right. That's why we see the U.S. trying to make massive inroads, with Israel, and
Yeah.
why they defend Israel so heavily. They understand that's a massive gateway into more oil supplies. That's why we saw them. Like, I don't want to bring up 9/11, but we have to have
We
this.
have to. We have to. I mean, it's
It's a
valid.
massive reason why they went straight into Afghanistan. They went
And Iraq.
straight into like they did that because they knew what they were going in for.
Yeah.
Was the main mission to stop Al Qaeda? Probably not, but it was maybe part two of what their
it was
massive
the
goal was.
reason that they could officially go in there.
Yeah, listen, I'm not going to say 9/11 was an inside job. I'm not going to fuel those flames, but did 9/11 officially give George W. Bush a reason to go into those countries?
Yes.
A
Yes,
hundred
it did.
percent to destroy governments, rule in, Saddam Hussein, taking him down, establishing their own leadership for good or for worse, how that worked out. But to go in there and try to find oil, was that their main goal? The U.S. government's going to tell you no. They went in there for maintaining peace, but
Sure.
I don't know. It's a bit hazy when you keep looking at things, right?
Exactly.
Not saying, like I said, not saying 9/11 was an inside job, but I'm not going to fuel those rumors. What happened happened, um, but you can't ignore what followed it,
Yep.
and how that went through. Um, so yeah, that situation. So we understood that was their break in. We understood why. They want to keep Saudi Arabia, why they want to have an influence in I want to say Dubai, in Qatar. Why they're so heavily influenced in those regions is because they understand that those countries are now finding these oil sands, finding these pockets of crude oil that are becoming so important
Yeah.
right now. In, like you said, not only um, for transportation and fabrication, but you know also distribution. It's so cruel, so cruel, crude oil, but so important to have. And I think Russia, what they're kind of backing on is the Arctic
Yes.
and what's underneath there, because nobody knows. The assumption is that there's also massive amounts of oil in there,
Hmm.
and that can be ultimately um, what the next, like, nobody really owns the Arctic.
Yeah.
So that would be interesting to see what happens. And I think maybe that's also why the United States is talking so much about wanting to annex Canada, because they have a little bit more of an easier pathway to the Arctic,
Hmm.
and also
Same thing with Greenland.
Russia too, Greenland, right? And like I said, nobody owns the Arctic, and it's because of the ice and because of everything that's there. It's so hard to know what's under that soil. Again, massive reports say that there's like a lot more oil there and a lot more land there, but nobody knows for sure because it's covered in ice.
Yeah.
And again, the side effect of finding that out is
A lot of people are going to
global,
drown.
global fucking warming. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think right now I'll
And
let you go with your point.
I want to elaborate on something here. I want to clarify something for the audience, especially if they don't know the stat. The U.S. is has by far, I think it's the number one producer of oil, if not the number two. It has enormous oil reserves of itself in itself. The major difficulty with the oil in the US is that it's what we call shale oil. It's oil that's essentially embedded in rock, the simplest way of putting it. And it takes a lot of effort and a lot of money to break it out, right? You need to frack essentially the oil. Think about it as what we have here in Canada in the Alberta tar sands, which is very difficult to separate the oil from the sand. So it's just an expensive process. I think the reason why they're making the moves they're making, especially in the Middle East, it's not so much to secure their oil reserves because they have a shit ton of oil themselves. I think it's more to stick it to China, right? Because China doesn't have oil. It has coal, yes, enormous amounts of coal. But again, coal is just used to power their energy, to get them electricity. It's not necessarily used, as we've elaborated a lot, in the production of a lot of the products they make. However, the Middle East has cheap oil and has oil that essentially is easily drillable because it's easily accessible, right? Which obviously China needs. So I think the moves that the US is doing in the Middle East is necessarily to block China from having access to that, to essentially stifle the growth they've had. And I know we want to keep it on Russia, Ukraine, but we can't. We need to speak about what's going on with the US versus China economically, right? Because as you correctly said, there's no way that they're going to go into actual physical combat. I don't think China wants to do that. I don't think the US wants to do that. But on the economic front, man, they're throwing hands at each other, right? The reality is that I think the US found out in the past couple of years, I would tend to say since 2018, that China is a real economic threat to them, right? And ever since then, they've been battling out, or through tariffs or through these geopolitical moves, to stifle that progress, right? And I want to kind of bring it full circle here and ask a follow up question. And I think this is where an interesting conversation can start. Do you think, in your opinion, that the US is losing its dominance globally and economically speaking against China, and that China is actually winning this battle?
I Well, if we look at the data, they're losing their economical dominance little by little. I mean, we can kind of see how strong, um, or how much growth the Chinese listen, if they weren't threatened by China, they wouldn't be putting tariffs the way they're putting tariffs.
That's it.
And you wouldn't hear them talk about wanting to bring production back to the United States if they weren't a little bit fearful of what might happen. So, like, do you think the United States is losing its ground? Yes, yes, I do. Is it a shock to anybody? No, I think there's a stupid statistic out there that goes approximately. I think it's 90% of all goods uh, bought in the United States is not fabricated in the United States at all. It's either made in Taiwan, it's made in China, it's made in the
Singapore,
Philippines,
Vietnam.
Singapore. So, you know, again, and there's a massive reason for that. Labor costs are
Yeah.
cheaper to produce, cheaper to make, I guess cheaper to import technically than it is to make in the United States, right? Because if you're making it in the United States, you're probably paying somebody 18.75, whatever, maybe $9, $10 an hour. I don't even know if that's the minimum wage anymore. Maybe more, maybe $15 an hour. You gotta pay people that minimum, right?
Yep.
There's a health insurance that has to go with it. Some of them are unionized.
Yep.
All this type of stuff. Where Singapore is probably paying
A fraction. Honestly, a fraction.
two
Right.
two two dollars an hour,
Even
maybe
less sometimes.
90 cents.
Yep.
And they're working insane hours. They can do 15, 16. I make it sound like it's a profession for them. They can do 15, 16 hours. It's like a slave. It is. It's modern slavery.
It is. Essentially, it is.
They're doing 15, 16 hours where, back in the United States, they have to have their hour break, their 15-minute lunches. They can only do 8 hours a day, and they're producing at a higher rate.
Yep.
At cheaper the cost. So, yeah, I mean, obviously they're losing their economical power. And if they weren't, then you wouldn't be hearing things about making America great again.
Interesting, because I would tend to debate you on that for one reason. It depends on what indicators you're looking at. If you're looking at manufacturing output, yes, they are. They've actually lost it a long time ago, which is why they realized it and they started doing what they're doing. But to actually understand the economic power of a nation, you don't only look at manufacturing. Manufacturing is a huge portion, I agree, but you don't only look at that, right? One of the major things you look at is real GDP. It's the stock market as well. How powerful are the capital markets in each country, right? What's the technology development like? How much technology is being developed? And one key thing that I do want to clarify here is that China's economy is heavily based on industrial manufacturing, right? US economy is heavily based on services. So we're talking about two different economies here, right? And if you actually look at everything still to this day, the US still dominates economically as powerhouse number one. It is, right? China has risen, right? I believe it's the third or second, right? But again, it depends on what you're looking at. I would agree with you if we were talking solely manufacturing. 100% agree, which is also why they're making the moves that they're making with tariffs and the geopolitical moves to stifle that growth. But you're talking stock market, that's no way. The capital markets in the US are almost 3 times larger. When you're talking about GDP, same thing.
I just want to go back to the original question you asked. Right? You asked, correct me if I'm wrong, you asked, is the sentiment.
No.
Do you believe.
Sentiment, I said, do you think the US is losing its economic power?
Power.
And China is winning.
So do you think, without looking at the GDPs and all that, let me go back to you and ask you this. Do you think, this, I'm going to put the word sentiment in there, do you think people in the United States feel, or do you think other people around the world feel the United States is losing its economical power?
If we're talking about sentiment, then yes, you're right. People are starting to think that the U.S. is losing its ground.
Sorry, maybe I misunderstood the question. That's what I heard. I'm half deaf tonight.
I could see it because you have half the headphones on.
I have half the headphones on. One of my ears is clogged, so I apologize. probably listening to this is like, oh, what's Sleepy doing on here tonight? Yeah,
No, but I
but
agree with you. If you look at the essentially the sentiment, I would agree that people are starting to look at China as maybe winning this battle. I would
yeah,
tend to agree.
maybe I misunderstood your original question, but the original question I understood was, or at least the way I
Or maybe the
phrased
way
it
I
was,
phrased it,
I thought it was
question
more of
was,
do you feel like the American people are, um, or do you feel like people are seeing America? What would you say?
do
Less. I like guys. I promise. I do this completely sober. Um, we all have off days.
yeah,
This is one of them for me. Do you feel like the American people feel like the U.S. economy is dwindling? I'll put it like that. That's the way I understood the question. So yeah, if you ask the American people, look at what's going on,
yes,
right? If it wasn't for Make America Great Again, then yeah, let's be honest with each other.
yeah, I would
If
agree.
you ask a lot of Americans who think they're worse off than they are now than they were 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. They
Yeah,
think their economy is doing worse. Where you can kind of look at GDP fall offs and you can like year on year,
yep,
and you can kind of see where that sentiment would come from, right?
yes,
Where 2021 to 2022 or 2021 to 20 yeah, what the hell did I say? 2021 to 2022. Just repeated myself. Um, there is a negative growth in the GDP. I think it's by 4% or 2%. And I might be wrong. It might be 2023 that year. But regardless, pick any one of those years, the growth of their GDP was significantly less growth than it would have been in previous years up till 2018. So it's not crazy to think.
well, look again. Maybe the way I phrased it was completely wrong,
No, but you're
right?
not wrong either. They still are one of the largest economical powers in the world. Like we're not going to sit here and try to make that up. But we know China's a close number two.
Oh
I think
yes,
Germany.
of course.
I don't have the numbers in me, but if you had to if we had to have the speech about this battle, I would assume it's U.S. one, China two, Germany probably within the top five. I would assume. Uh, Russia's probably up there,
Yeah, Russia is up there in terms of power.
right? And then I would probably look at maybe those other countries, maybe being England,
India,
uh,
India is up there.
India again, large export in India. Um, I wouldn't be like I don't even know if you include Dubai and
You
all
can
that. I
include
don't know.
Saudi Arabia, yes.
Yeah, but I don't know how high up they would be because let's be
Well,
honest,
their
the
major
money that's
export would be oil, right?
the oil, and that would be the only reason why they would be up there. But it's just exporting oil high enough to get through countries like I was going to say Italy, but no. France, is it enough to get through Switzerland? Is it, you know what I mean? Is it that, like, I'm looking at the top five. But yeah, I mean, let's not be stupid about it. I still think the US is definitely, I think if you ask most people, number one or number two.
Yeah,
And if you ask other people, if they're not number one, they're number two, and number one is China. I don't think anybody would have any two of those reversed in any different way. I don't think anybody's saying, oh, strongest economy, Afghanistan.
there we go. Now we're talking.
So
That's the
maybe Korea,
sleeper.
maybe yeah, maybe Korea, maybe Japan are up there too. But
No.
again, I might have graduated in economics, but I still don't understand how the Japanese system works for the life of me. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in that sentiment. If we're looking at the sentiment and how people feel, I agree with you. People feel like the US is losing its dominance. However, when you look at the stats, it's a different picture, right? In
well,
at If you look at, let's say, the statistical side of it, on manufacturing and even on GDP growth, I will agree, yes they are. China in 2024 had a GDP growth of 5%, the US had 2.5, right? Manufacturing, same thing. So, but you got to look at other factors too to essentially establish how powerful a nation is economically. And that's why it's still the US dominates. But this brings me to another interesting point. Obviously, China has been growing at a rapid pace, right? And wants to continue that because its goal is to challenge the US, right? Within that goal, and I want to bring it a bit full circle here with what we're seeing essentially with the move of North Korea to essentially, allegedly, help Russia in this. There's risks now that come out for the US as well on that front, specifically for South Korea and what could occur there in terms of tensions, Japan, and even Taiwan, right? So there's a lot of geopolitical tension now opening up in that region because of what's happening in Russia, Ukraine, because of what's happening in the Middle East. So to me, that's why the US, I think, is turning its attention and sacrificing Ukraine. It's going like, I have a lot more important things to worry about, which is the Middle East and what's gonna potentially happen, or I need to keep an eye or have reserves or have the reserved strength to involve myself in the Indo Pacific if needed.
Look, gonna try to keep this a little bit short because I know we've already been going for quite a bit of time.
Yeah, I
But
mean, it's an interesting topic. We know it, but
it is.
go ahead.
It's an interesting topic. I think we should devote more time to.
Yep,
Not a quick segment, but maybe just to touch on it a
yep.
little bit, just to give an opinion on it, and maybe, like I said, something we can dive into uh,
On a
with a
following
lot
podcast or
more.
something else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll leave it like this. I don't think they're going to sacrifice Ukraine, nor do I think Russia's going to give up Ukraine that easily,
Hmm.
because we both know why NATO never really brought in Ukraine to begin with, because they were fearful of this exact situation. And we know why Russia wants Ukraine, right? Whether it's for resources, whether it's for a little bit more access into Europe, uh, right? And we know why the United States views Ukraine as a massive ally, because it's closer to Russia,
Hmm.
and they can, exactly why they fought so hard to buy Alaska, because it's to, you know, keep an eye on Russia
Yep.
without really having to worry about it. And that's why they view Ukraine as such a key aspect to it. Because if they lose Ukraine, starts becoming a little bit more hazy,
Yep.
right? And that region with the allies that they have, right? Because I think, there's Poland, and then I think you're maybe looking towards France, which would be the next possible largest military. Germany, uh,
Yep. I think so.
that area, so quite a bit more distance away. So I think there is a true value in Ukraine for the United States, and I think they understand that. As far as Indo-Pacific, Taiwan is crucial because it keeps an eye on China, and like I said, we can go into a whole episode
Yeah.
about Taiwan and China and how that came to be and the different relationships, and the United States' relationship with Taiwan and the ROC, and China's why they
Yeah.
wanted why they view Taiwan as theirs, and why they don't view Hong Kong, and like all this other type of stuff in that region, which is colonization. If we have to really sum it up in one word, um, I don't think the United States really views North Korea as a threat. To be honest with you,
No.
I don't think many people view North Korea as a threat. To be honest with you,
No.
I think it's like the little brother that I see North Korea as Stewie. They always talk a big game, but then they can never really deliver. Like,
Hey,
we
Stewie's
were
dangerous,
saying.
man.
No,
Don't
no, no,
compare
but we
North
keep
Korea to,
saying.
to Stewie.
No,
Compare
but
it to
if you
someone.
remember, no, but if you remember in the early seasons, right, it's always like, I'm going to kill Lewis. I'm going to kill Lewis, and then Brian goes like, you don't have the balls to kill Lewis. You just talk a big game. That's kind of how I see North Korea. They talk a lot. They try to send warning shots, but
Yeah.
like I don't think the United States is scared of North Korea. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
I think they know if they really try to push. That's a fight they can win.
Right.
Yeah, in the Indo-Pacific, like we said, it is crucial. I think again that's why they have Hawaii, because they do care about it. But as far as the conflicts going on into that region and the importance of Ukraine, I think they value Ukraine
Okay.
heavily more than they would the Indo-Pacific right now in this particular moment in time.
Right.
I don't think they see massive threats there. And I know you alluded to China and their situation with Taiwan, but keep in mind China and India still freaking hate each other,
Yes.
and they're still at war. So I think the United States probably looks over there and goes, "Well, they're kind of occupied
Yeah.
right now," and looks at North Korea and they're kind of occupied. They're doing their own thing, whatever that thing is. Little rocket man shooting rockets somewhere. To be honest with you, other countries in that region, I don't think they're too bothered by it. Mostly because I think they're viewed as allies opposed to enemies. Uh, and allude to, at least right now in the Middle East, they have Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Maybe not as a military ally, but I think you can say close resemblance to the United States. They have Dubai, close resemblance. Qatar, close resemblance. They have Israel. Make that as you want. And they just kind of liberated Syria from
Russia.
40 years. Yeah, Russia. So
Let's
again,
be
we don't know how
real.
that situation.
Assad. Let's
Yeah.
be real. Assad was backed by Russia.
No, 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 yeah. Well, that's where you fled to.
Yeah.
It's if you're not backed by Russia, I don't see why you flee to Russia
There you go.
unless you're backed by it. But we'll see how that plays out. In terms of the African continent, I don't think there's anything really going on over there, to my knowledge, at least right now. It's
Yeah.
freaking knock on wood, nothing really develops right now. Yeah, so I don't see them giving up Ukraine. I think that is right now. If you're looking at the chessboard in a sense, it's their strongest piece.
Hmm.
If they lose Ukraine, then yeah, I can see them putting resources and dominoes elsewhere. But I really think when you look at it or digest it little by little, I don't think they're going to sacrifice Ukraine. They might sacrifice, you know, maybe Lebanon, maybe Syria would be a better sacrifice for
I
them.
would doubt that.
But
Right.
I'm just trying to say,
Yeah.
if you're looking at the bigger picture right now, right, uh, you can't really afford to lose Ukraine either, right? If you had to go,
True.
which one would you rather lose between Syria and Ukraine? I think you would rather keep Ukraine because of the proximity it is to Russia, and God forbid a military war doesn't break out.
Well, look, I just want to clarify before we kind of step into the closing remarks here that when I say sacrifice Ukraine, I'm not talking the entirety. I'm talking essentially cut a deal. Like Russia, you take
Yeah,
these regions, right, that you want, fine. Take, for example, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but let's say take Luhansk and Donetsk, right? Fuck off. But the rest of Ukraine comes with NATO, right?
pretty much just fuck off.
Right. But that's what I mean by sacrifice because I think the US just wants to clear that out
I
to
don't think
focus on the Middle East. Maybe.
No, I don't even think it's a maybe. I just literally don't think you can do that with Russia. I mean, we've seen what happened with Crimea when they
Yeah.
said, "Oh yeah, Russia, you can have Crimea, no problem." This was 2014, and 4 years later, oh, we have Crimea. Well, let's go take. I feel
Luhansk and
like just
Donetsk. Yeah.
yeah, I just think you're kicking the problem down the road ultimately to a point
Okay.
where I think it's either Ukraine has to remain Ukraine, right? Unless it goes to a vote or something where that Donetsk region says, well, I feel like I do belong to Russia and we do want to go there, then fine. But I think if you're Ukraine, you have to keep Ukraine, and it's not because you can't afford to let go of Donetsk, but I think it's to make a statement.
I think I understand what you mean, right? Because if they do give it up, they're not. They're basically they're telling Russia you can do whatever you want every so often, and we're going to give you what you ask.
Well, not only
Right.
that, Russia's going to
It's
see it as a win.
yeah, exactly. So it's essentially saving face at that point, which is it's a perspective that I didn't think about. And if I think about it, you're right on that end.
Because Russia goes back and goes, well, we won.
Yeah.
You know, perfect. We got come home, brethren. But at the end of the day, it just kind of means, well, now we're good. Now we even have an easier route into Ukraine, and I don't think it's even gonna. At that point, is even signing that NATO contract worthy, or are you just opening up a whole new can of worms with them?
Yeah. Exactly.
You really have to fight for what you have right now, and you have to kind of put this as a warning shot to be like, hey, don't fuck with us. Like, just get rid of your troops. We'll call a truce, right? And then you decide what you want to do with NATO and the protection laws involved in that. Because, like we said, uh, there's massive ramifications to that.
Yeah.
And like I said, Ukraine and Russia don't like each other politically at all right now. Um, you sign that contract, and Russia decides, "Fuck your contract. I'm gonna test your balls on it." You open up a whole new paradox
Yeah.
to what the fuck can happen, right? Because you sign up. Let's just say Ukraine joins. I know. We should be wrapping this up shortly, and
Close your
we should,
remarks. That's perfectly
yeah,
fine.
my closing remarks. But I feel like I can talk about this a lot
Yeah, yeah.
more. But say Ukraine signs that they're part of NATO, and that clause that's in NATO kicks in, right? If one of us is attacked, we're all attacked, and it's all over. What if Russia attacks Ukraine? And what if France knows the ramifications if they get involved? Germany knows the ramifications if they get involved. The United States knows the ramification. Canada knows the ramification if they have to get involved. What if they chicken shit out of it and don't do it? Don't oblige? Then Russia basically just said, "Yeah, fuck you," right?
Yeah,
Your pact means nothing.
exactly.
Then what?
Yeah.
Like,
Then
then what? You know what I mean? You basically just pulled the biggest bullshit card. Or option number two, they all do respawn and we have nuclear warfare.
exactly.
like, like, you know what I mean? It's a lose-lose situation. Like, as much as I want to say you have to protect Ukraine, and I totally understand, that's why they're doing this kind of off the book protection to it, because they know they can't, dude. It's suicide.
Yeah.
It's suicide. At least while Putin is in charge of Russia, it's suicide. Because what if he has a death wish?
Yeah.
You know,
What if he has nothing to lose?
what if Trump has a fucking death wish? You know,
Great
you got
question.
to be smart about it.
Yeah, of course. And look, again, like you said, very complex topic, and we do need to move into the closing remarks. We can talk about this for hours, and I think definitely we'll come back to it. But as a conclusion, as the war in Ukraine continues, really its trajectory is shaped by a complex web of shifting global priorities, like we've talked about and like we've really seen. The evolving roles of the United States, of China, of Russia, of Ukraine, and the potential ripple effects of leadership changes and the broader geopolitical realignments all raise pressing questions about the future, really, of this conflict, right? Will the West maintain its essentially unified stance that it has, or will internal shifts weaken its resolve? Will China maneuver within this shifting landscape, and what new alliances really might emerge from this? The answers to these questions not only determine Ukraine's fate, but as we've seen, could redefine global power dynamics for years to come. The only thing that really remains certain is this war is more than a battlefield struggle. It's a turning point in the balance of global influence. What we're seeing is that the world is changing. The world is watching, and history is being written in real time. Now, as always, we want to hear from you as well. Please share your opinions on the matter. What are your thoughts essentially on this war, and how have you been affected by it if you have? We are always more than happy to interact with you in the comments. As always, this episode can be streamed on all streaming platforms, be it on Apple or Google Play, and obviously here on Spotify. If you enjoyed the episode, we welcome you to subscribe, as we will be tackling major events and major topics such as this one in future episodes. And we also invite you to share the episode with someone you think will enjoy this type of content. As always, my name has been Theo, and I've been joined by my incredible co host, Joe, and we will both see you on the next one.
This has been Uncut, and thank you for listening.